Hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us in this session, and it's great to see so many familiar faces. I'm just going to share my screen for the presentation. There you go. Can everyone see? Yes? Brilliant. Thank you. So yeah, this session is on how to be culturally aware to succeed in Asia and South America. My name is Eva Túnez Salvador, and I'm the Director of Genuine Translations, which is a multilingual translation company currently covering 32 languages. And we basically help businesses thrive in other cultures. And also I'm the co-founder of Local to Global together with Janina. And Local to Global is a gateway to fulfill every exporter's requirement in terms of translation, branding, and cultural training.
Hello everyone, I'm Janina Neumann, a German-English bilingual graphic designer, intercultural management trainer and owner of Janina Neumann Design. So Janina Neumann Design helps clients create a social impact in the UK and abroad. I'm delighted to create Local to Global with Eva and share with you some of our insights into different cultures and how you can apply that on your marketing material as well.
So today we'll be covering what it means to be culturally aware, and we'll show you a way of analyzing culture, at how to be culturally aware in Asia and South America, together with some real examples of cultural misunderstandings in those areas. And also we'll share some tips on how to work effectively with multicultural teams.
So what does it mean to be culturally aware? Well, sometimes we don't actually know that we're living in this cultural bubble and that the way we've been brought up and where we live and how we've experienced things actually shape our worldview. And David Foster Wallace tells a great analogy of this by telling the following story. There are these two young fish swimming along and they happen to meet an older fish swimming the other way, who nods at them and says, "Morning boys, how's the water?" And the other two young fish swim on for a bit. And then eventually one of them goes and says to the other, "What the hell is water?"
So means understanding that you have a perspective lens. It's not only about the language you speak, but how you can express yourself and just be aware of your own cultural bubble. Obviously, there are sometimes differences between personalities, and that can also affect the way cultures interact with each other. And the historical context also plays a big role. So yeah, it plays a big role in the way culture has been developed. So that's another thing to take into account. And finally, also being aware of bicultural people and even multicultural people is important. And just don't assume that everyone fits in the same box.
So when we talk about being culturally aware, we need to make sure that our perspective of a different culture might be a generalization. So I think Erin Meyer summarizes this beautifully by saying it's not a question of culture or personality, but of culture and personality.
So why is it important to be culturally aware in business? We thought the following case study will be the best way to show this. So the Tesco on Liverpool Street in London placed these crisps under the Ramadan banner in 2015. And as you know, many Muslims don't eat during the day in Ramadan and they avoid pork products. Now, even though these Pringles don't contain pork, they only have the flavoring, you will agree that it was completely offensive to Muslims, and Tesco was forced to remove these crisps following a waiver, to which they later apologized, of course. But we thought it was a good example of to show how important it is to include the cultural management in your business strategy, let alone your marketing and advertising campaigns. Yes.
So we're now going to look at a way to analyse culture, and there are different frameworks that cultural trainers use, but we think this one is quite applicable to you running your own business. So this is one way of looking at culture. It's through the 8 scales presented by Erin Mayer. So they go into communicating, evaluating, persuading, leading, deciding, trusting, disagreeing, and scheduling. And it's also important to reflect on where you sit on those scales, because that will determine how you see the other culture and where misunderstandings may occur. So specifically, we're going to look at being culturally aware in Asia and South America. So we're going to go into the different scales, but also highlight some cultural misunderstandings that might occur. And whilst we go through this, it would be great for you to also reflect on a cultural misunderstanding that you've had, and perhaps also share it with us later on. So in general, this is how you may approach the culture in Asia. So I'll give you a few examples to demonstrate the cultural scales. So communicating is a high context culture. So for example, someone worked with a Chinese colleague and they said to the Chinese colleague, "I look forward to seeing you on Sunday at the office." And the Chinese colleague said, "Yes, it's my son's birthday on Sunday." Now, this was his way of saying he will not be working on Sunday. It's not quite indirect. It's not quite direct as we might expect. For example, if you run a business in the UK, you may say, "I'm not working on Sunday because it's my son's birthday." In China, they shake hands in descending hierarchical order when entering a meeting room. And they also have a seating arrangement for dinners according to the guests' ranks. And getting this wrong can mean that not making it to the next meeting or not closing the deal. Deciding, for example, in Japan, they have a ringi system, which is hierarchical but ultra-consensual. So low-level managers discuss a new idea among themselves and come to consensus before presenting it to managers one level higher. And they even have a proposal document and software for this. An example with trusting in Japan and across East Asia is also that drinking with customers and collaborators is a common step in the trust building process, because it may show that you have nothing to hide. In India, if you don't develop a personal relationship with your team or partners, they will always say that everything is okay even when it's not, which is really developing a product or service, or you need to know where to respond to certain situations. So we're now going to an example. So a pharmaceutical company in Tokyo communicating with the US office. So this is a real life case study that was kindly forwarded to us. So the Japanese man would send a very long formal email to his US colleague, would reply in a very informal way. And it will also take a long time for the Japanese to make the decision. And they always wanted to change the labeling and information, something that the US colleagues didn't want, as they wanted it standardized for each country. Is there anyone who'd like to share their perspectives on how there may have been differences in the way that you approach a different issue?
Happy to say something if that's
Yes,
helpful.
of course.
I guess, sometimes people have different hierarchical kind of contexts. So it might be that that person has got to kind of go up and down before they kind of can actually, some things can take longer because of that. It's got to do a bit more traveling, I suppose.
That's a great point. And also from corresponding with our contact who shared this case study with us, he also mentioned that the Japanese team needed to get the approval from the Japanese health authority, and it would take a long time because of the decision making, and they did want to change the labeling information because it was appropriate for the country that they're operating in. But the US office just wanted to get results and didn't understand that there was a process that they had to go through. And also, as you mentioned, Joe, that there was a hierarchy as well. And the solution was that they both needed to move closer to one another on the scales. The Americans needed to see that in Japan, the process was different, and the Japanese needed to become less formal with their colleagues and see that they were on the same team. When we were first interacting, it was almost as if they were working for two different companies.
I did work with a Japanese bank once in the London office, and the guy who just arrived from Tokyo, who turned up at 5 o'clock in the morning, was a bit surprised that nobody else was there.
That's a great insight. Thank you, Scott, for sharing that. Eva, would you like to go on to South America?
Yes. Okay, so we move on to South America. It's worth first noting that South America is also known as Latin America, and although recently I heard that some Brazilians don't consider themselves Latin, so it's a bit, yeah, I thought it would be better to call it South America. But also remember that it implies Central America with countries such as Mexico. And these countries here are just a representation of the region, so it doesn't mean that the information applies just to those countries. South America is really diverse, as you can imagine, and every country is different and unique, but they all have common cultural similarities. And also regarding language, as you know, Latin American Spanish is spoken in many of the countries, but there's in Brazil, so don't try speaking Spanish there. And there's also English, French, even Dutch, and some indigenous languages as well. When it comes to communicating, and similarly to Asia, actually, they use a high context approach with messages being implied, not expressly said, especially in the written communications. And a contrast will be North America, for example, they are more direct, so they are considered a low context culture. And when it comes to evaluating, they give indirect diplomatic negative feedback, and they are very respectful. So in Mexico, for example, you wouldn't give feedback to an individual in front of a group. They'll have a private meeting for that. With persuading, they are what is known as principles first space, as opposed to applications first space. And in university, you are taught to back up your arguments with theory first and then practice. So when you are giving a presentation, for example, they will believe it more if you are using theory first as opposed to using a case study, for example. They want to know where that reasoning behind comes from. And with leading, they are hierarchical, so they managers as Mr. and Mrs. And if you want to escalate an issue to the top leader, you have to follow a hierarchy of managers. Also, when it comes to decision making, they are top down, so the leader will make the decision on behalf of the team as opposed to having a consensus. With trusting, they build trust, getting to know you personally and having long lunches, like many people know. So they are considered relationship based. And with disagreeing, they avoid confrontation. And in fact, disagreeing and open confrontation can impact negatively the organization and the team. So they want to preserve group harmony. And I will always remember a Mexican colleague who I used to work with, and she will never disagree with our boss, even though and now I understand that she was just preserving that group harmony. And then when it comes to scheduling, they are flexible time as opposed to linear time, like in the UK or Germany. So timekeeping is not as important, and being late for a meeting is not uncommon, and meetings might go on longer than in other countries and cultures. And here I have, I wanted to share 3 real scenarios of cultural misunderstandings between a Venezuelan team member at a multinational oilfield services company and other cultures. So the first one is when this person traveled to Mexico to sign, to get the Mexican clients to sign a commercial contract, but they wouldn't sign anything until they were taken out for lunch. And you would expect all South American countries to behave in the same way. You know, the long lunches are very popular, but as I said, there are still differences between countries, and you will expect this more from some countries than others. And then the second example is with the Russians. So they wouldn't engage in small talk before a meeting, and they will go straight to talking about operations. And this could be because of the way they build trust. So as I said, in South America, they are more relationship-based, and small talk and some getting to know you personally is more common than in other cultures. In Russia, they probably are more task-based when it comes to building relationships. So they will place more importance to how well you perform a task or how quickly you reply to an email. Small talk, anyway, is a bit, it's a difficult topic because every country is different, and what the British consider common with small talk might not be the same with other cultures. And then last but not least with India. So this lady traveled to India and she wouldn't be allowed in an oil platform, even though she was the manager. And she had to speak through a third person in order to get the job done, which must have been really frustrating. Well, luckily we have this Venezuelan lady here. She's Adriana Freites, and she's from Broad & Base Projects, which overseas businesses expand to the UK. And I thought, Adriana, you could share a bit about your experience. How did this impact the relationship with the clients or your work?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for having me here. Just talking about the multicultural things. The company that I used to work is a multicultural. This is a big company that is based in 85 countries, and you can imagine everybody just working together. And we had at that moment first time of our training was to understand how to fit these cultural differences between everybody that it was working, especially to work with a team and also to work with the client. That is the final goal of the company, just to make sure the client is happy. And all these things that we were mentioned here was like a small thing that I had to go through, and was really frustrating most of the time to understand each people and how they work, how they just manage the operations. Because the cultural things, if you do something that is just offended the other person, this person just is the client and just tell you just have to go, and you have to go, and you cannot just finish your job, and you will have all the problems with your managers and with your operations. And it's an oil field. It's very expensive operations, and every minute that you take from the operation is really expensive. And these kind of things as just purely cultural. When I was in Mexico, I didn't know that I have to go with the client to take a lunch. Even if we are speaking the same language, as you're supposed to be very close and in our culture, but was really difficult, really different. And the thing that I think, or I was thinking that I speak Spanish, I'm supposed to be the same. That gave me a little a resistance from the client to make sure that I was in charge of the contract, and he had to sign the contract with me and not with another person. I was a woman. That is a really difficult there. I was a manager. They're supposed to be differentiations, hierarchical things, really, really strong hierarchical differentiations. Was at the end was nice because you learn how to manage, you learn how to do it. And in Venezuela, in Latin America, we are really talking person. We know we need to understand the other person. We need to know to what happened with the other person, even if the client, just to make easy the things. And the Russian doesn't like that. Just go straight, just sit down, start the meeting. We have 30 minutes to complete these things, and you have to go, and that's it. I don't want to know about you. And it was nice, but was difficult. And at the end, you have to manage, and you have to understand how to manage these kind of things. And especially if you are running a business by yourself, you need to know. And the only way I think that you can know this kind of differences of how to manage these things is get to know the client that you have, or the different cultures. It's really, really difficult to learn the culture. Just checking things, or when you talk to the people, you can find the differences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, and later we'll share some tips on how to avoid those misunderstandings. But yes, it's very important to get to know the culture in advance, or just being aware that there'll be differences, and maybe set protocols with between the two cultures. But yeah, thank you. So does anyone else want to share any cultural misunderstanding that they've had? It doesn't have to be from a business context. It can be personal context, and it can be other areas, and not just Asia and South America.
Chinese colleagues quite a lot, and those implied requests are very common. So for example, another example would be, we just finished a session, we've been working all afternoon, when we were working face to face, and we were exiting the building. And when I finish a session, I always want to go for a run or do something very physical, because I have a lot of sort of energy. And she was really, really tired. So as we kind of exited the building, she said, I said, I was kind of heading for the stairs, and she just said, oh, there's an elevator there. And it wasn't like, I'm really tired, Joe, please can we take the lift? And if you don't have the right ears on, you don't catch that implication, that implied nature of the request. So yeah, just to give another example to what Janina was talking about earlier.
Oh, that's really funny.
I think I've got one for Janina from my experience when I lived in Germany. And I went to an official function at the Rathaus with which is their town hall, with a bunch of not German colleagues, but German officials. And we had a very nice cocktail party, and then somebody clapped their hands and said, thank you very much indeed. The event's over, everybody go home. There was then a race for people rushing off to get their coats, and it wasn't the Brits, because I'm afraid that the German officials were hurtling out of the building, having done their duty.
A great story. Just for anyone else, what do you think the cultural difference was there?
Was it the timekeeping, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, my perspective would be, that the Germans tend to be a bit more task-based in how they form relationships, whereas the British people might be more relationship based in that context. So the Germans might have seen it as I've completed my task, I've attended, this is part of what we should be doing, whereas the British people might be thinking, actually, I want to extend the conversation because that's how I build the relationship with you. Be interesting to hear if someone has other thoughts on that.
And the drink was free.
Yes.
I think it kind of relates to Scott's point about the airport pickup as well, doesn't it? I mean, it's really interesting, that example, because often I've been working with kind of cultures in Africa or Asia. So often the British are down the perhaps not the relationship building end of the spectrum. So for example, British colleagues of mine have sort of told me, oh, well, we took them back to the hotel at 5 o'clock because they want to have some personal time. And actually, if you speak to the visitors from Asia, they might not want personal time. They want to be looked after. They want to do some social stuff, and we can be very compartmentalized. So it's quite interesting to see it from a slightly different perspective, going spectrum.
That's really interesting. And also when you think about marketing resources, perhaps you should invest in those types of situations more into actually having that resource to extend the evening, whereas, for example, go out for dinner rather than creating another flyer or brochure. It's just really interesting how you allocate those resources.
In Mexico, there is an interesting part of your budget that have to be for companies that are in service to the organizations or the government organizations. There is a part of the budget that have to be allocated to a Christmas party, because all the companies, the service company, have to put a Christmas gift for each organization that you are working, because it's a part of the culture that all the service company put something that during this Christmas party, the people just have some kind of gift or something like that, and you have to be part of this, and you have to put it. It's something. It's not that you want to. You have to.
Yeah, that's really interesting, especially when we reflect on some of the policies that we have in the UK about how you gift a client, and sometimes tender documents might be around that. What are your policies on that? So it's just interesting, that cultural perspective as well.
That was something that was difficult to manage, because the company I was working for was for French, and the French people, they said, you have this budget, it's not more than 100. I guess that was $100 at that moment, and if you talk to your client, and your client said, okay, this time your gift will be a TV. I cannot pay a TV, and you have to do a lot of things to be able to please the client and to be okay, because the other companies are doing it.
That's so great.
The other thing to look at is if you look in UK law now, it's illegal for a company to conduct activity which appears to be bribery.
Mm-hmm.
So again, there may be countries which are demanding something you cannot deliver legally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's really interesting reflecting on that.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have a cultural misunderstanding that they would like to share? Mark? Oh, yeah.
One point that I would like to just talk about is, especially in Venezuela, we are really relaxed talking to people. And when we were working with people from other countries, not even just different, just inside of South America, we used to use a language that is really colloquial language, and then sometimes the client is really just offended for that, and this is as an issue because they can't stop your payment, they can't stop your operations just because you are talking to them, and they just consider that disrespectful, and it's that because it's the normal way we talk, and We have to learn how to do it, how to talk with another people, especially when I'm talking to clients.
Mhm.
Oh, that's really interesting. It's so good to have a discussion about this. Mark, did you want to share
Yes,
a
I'm sorry I'm
misunderstanding?
late. I was in a waiting room somewhere else for half an hour, but I found you at last. So yes, so well, it's not my personal experience, but it's something that I observed, and I've been trying to kind of think about this, and I guess you could call it the sort of Latin lover versus personal space issue. So as Latin Americans on this meeting will be aware, Latin Americans tend to stand close to one another when they're speaking to each other than will be the case in Europe or North America. And of course, from a British woman's point of view, he's entering her personal space. Now, a British man might do this for several reasons: the erotic interest. But if she finds him attractive and interprets his proximity as a sign of interest, then even though she has no interest, he may reciprocate. Now the problem is that there's a misunderstanding. Because the Latin interlocutor will be using eye contact, perhaps they'll be smiling, and the British woman will misunderstand and think that he's actually making a pass at her, which in many cases is not true. So this is just something that we need to bear in mind, that stereotype of a Latin lover is very much a European and American stereotype and isn't recognized in Latin America at all. And we need to be aware of that when networking with Latin colleagues.
Yes, definitely. I see it in the movies all the time. Yeah.
Especially because we kiss. This is not normal sometimes for British people or the other European people. We kiss every time we say hello and we say goodbye. We kiss each other, women and men. And I was asking sometimes, and I was in a training course, and some guy just asked me, "How many boyfriends do you have?" Yeah. Just none. Because you are just kissing everybody, and every time you see them, it's normal. This is our culture. It's like that.
Yeah.
It's so interesting to hear different points of view and situations and how someone else might respond to a certain situation. Thank you for sharing. Is there anyone else who would like to share an example or a comment?
Shall we move on to the next slide? And maybe at the end we can continue the conversations. Okay. Janina.
So basically, we just thought we'd dive into some other common cultural misunderstandings around the world. So this is a bit more general, but we thought by having examples, you can see how different people approach different scenarios. So these are also generalizations, but it's important to be aware of them in case they happen as well. So the first one, greeting someone for the first time.
So in Nigeria, for example, they take vows when greeting the elders, and it's all about respecting the elders, to be honest. And also they don't address people with their first names. They will always say sir, madam, even outside the business environment. Yes. So, yeah, that was my point about Karen.
Yes, and for example, in Germany, there's sometimes some confusion, but also German people feel this. It's a bit uncomfortable. You don't know whether you're addressing someone in a formal or informal manner, because it's quite common for someone to ask permission for you to use the informal manner when speaking to someone, but someone might also say to you, actually, I'm not comfortable with that. I would like to keep it in a formal manner. And you haven't done anything wrong. It's just way how they want to basically compartmentalize the business and the personal environment. And I think that's also applicable, for example, in the French language and other languages as well. And when meeting a colleague from Israel, he said that it's actually quite common in Israel to address someone informally and sometimes even to say, hello, my brother or sister.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so when it comes to staying in touch in China, as you probably know, they love their business cards, and it's common to give someone a card with two hands. It's recommended to have English on one side and Chinese on the other side, and present it with the Chinese language on top.
And for example, in Germany, it's quite important to highlight your qualifications and titles, for example, in an email signature or on your business card, just because they're quite hierarchical, but also they put a lot of emphasis on experience and qualifications as well. So just something that I've noticed, German business people are quite well prepared for face-to-face meeting, or now over video conferencing. So they will have usually thoroughly researched your company's products and services before a meeting. And if you haven't done the same, sometimes that can be a reflection that you might not be that interested in them, which is their perception. But I think it's quite important to bear that in mind. Just from my experience in the UK, some people are very prepared for a meeting, some are not. Some people may even ask you in the UK what you even do, even though you set up a meeting. So that doesn't come across as well in Germany.
And in Spain, for example, it's generally accepted to be 5-10 minutes late for a meeting, and they wouldn't particularly advise if they are going to be late. So it's just expected. It might be a bit too late, but yes, similarly to the South American culture, timekeeping is not as important in Spain. So never assume that everyone will understand you in English, even if they speak it. So it's recommended to use what is known as global English, with shorter sentences, no idioms, less ambiguity, just so that it's easier to communicate with each other. But if you are if you are selling your product or a service overseas, obviously it's recommended to have the translation, because just to avoid that the brand gets bad reputation or that our relationship is damaged. And also be aware of the language variants, for example, American English and British English.
Yes, and also to add to that, I think bearing in mind how you use idioms. Idioms can be an effective way to market to an audience if you're integrating into their culture and show that you understand their needs and values. However, sometimes there are cultural misunderstandings when you use idioms, because you haven't quite realized or localized what you're trying to say in that language. So it's not just a complete translation of an idiom that we might have in the UK, but it needs to be appropriate of a way of communicating in a different culture.
And last but not least, the dress code. So the dress code varies from industry to industry, even within the same country. And sometimes certain industries will think it's important to highlight personality more than other industries. But as a general rule, in Mediterranean Europe, well, actually in Europe and in North America, they tend to dress smart casuals, or with blazer and chinos, for example. Conservative dressing is common in Asia, Middle East and South America, and that will be. And then finally in Africa, it's very common to see traditional clothing during business meetings.
And so how can we work effectively with multicultural teams? And it will also be great to get your perspectives on this. So we'll share some tips that we've. So it's really important to listen to the meaning, not just the words. How has the message been delivered? Can you accurately read their body language? But also reflect on that some cultures might be less engaging with their body language than others, and that doesn't mean that they trust you any less or feel less happy with you. But also it's important to ask for clarification if you're unsure, and try not to mimic the culture based on your understanding of it, because they will also understand that you come from a different culture. And that leads on to don't form opinions too quickly. That's really important, and see it as a long-term relationship. And when things do feel odd, respond to them, but also perhaps do some cultural learning based on that. And also laugh at yourself sometimes, because sometimes how you have perceived a situation might not be how it's true. We all experience that in our own businesses, even in the country that we're operating in.
Yes, and then it's really important to set protocols up front. As I mentioned earlier, if you feel there will be cultural differences, it's just easier to just be direct about it and just set some protocols. It doesn't have anything long, but in terms of the way you are going to communicate, whether a meeting will need to be, whether you need to do like recaps or share the presentation later on. So the same way you will act in any business environment. And then it's important not to mimic a confrontational or direct negative feedback style that is not yours, because you are more likely to get it wrong and start offending people. Use low context, positive language and downgraders. So downgraders are slightly or kind of, or I can't think of any other at the moment, but and understand and adapt to one another's behaviors, be patient, and just make the most of a culturally diverse team, because it's been researched that it leads to innovation and also creativity in the workplace.
Does anyone else have some tips how to work with a multicultural team, just out of interest?
I would like to say that you have to learn about people, from people. Just listen first, and then try to learn what is exactly what they try to do, or the way they do, and at the end, if you are working with a team, everything will just match. Everything will be just at the end, just together and one direction. Everybody have to put low and downs, and then you have to give your idea, and just at the end have an understanding to be able to achieve the goals of your job.
Yeah, I think remembering the common goals is really important, because they'll try to achieve them in their own way. And that's really important to understand that you're on the same team, or you want to achieve a certain goal together. Is there anyone else who'd like to share? Yes, Mark?
Sorry. Yeah, I think from my experience in working in multinational teams, multicultural teams, it's always a good idea to confirm or to summarize what's been agreed in writing. So not to leave it to the written word, and to ensure that when you are summarizing or confirming in writing that it is in global English and doesn't have slang and the other mistakes that we make. So that would be my tip. Confirm English to ensure that everybody is singing from the same hymn sheet, to use an English idiom.
Thank you, Mark.
I think
Yes.
there's an element of being tolerant. And it occurred to me when you were speaking, what you don't want to do is to end up trying to mirror the other individual's culture, because that's could be taken as mockery. So remain within your own culture, but understand somebody else's. And I think that's the balance to be struck, rather than sort of it's meeting them halfway, not swapping and going entirely in the wrong direction.
That's a great point. Thank you.
Just going to add to the sort of set protocols up front, because I think just acknowledging really that diversity in the room, which I don't think we always do, so that people are kind of mindful that it's quite likely at some point that I'm not going to understand what somebody else says, or you don't understand what I say, and just to really normalize that, so it's not something people shove away in an awkward, put away in an awkward corner, but actually just discuss it and feel free to say, oh, I don't know what that phrase means. When you say it sits like a moustache, what does that mean? I don't know, understand, and just to kind of, monitor that use of global English, constantly checking that everyone's understanding everything.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I had a conversation earlier today about trust across cultures, talking about the cognitive versus affective trust. So one being sort of trust that comes from the head. The criteria is maybe how I might trust you based on how you deliver your tasks, whether you are credible and accountable, or the other type of trust coming sort of from the heart. And that's based on these close relationships that you can build with people. And that's also something to bear in mind, thinking about what do I need in order to trust others, but also how other people build trust in different cultures.
That's a brilliant point. I really like that. Is there anyone else who'd like to share?
Yeah, I apologize. My video's not working. I think the biggest thing is, since I've been working for a global organization the last 4 years, I think context is a big key in how you approach situations. And this is again, understanding that the context of the situation has to be understood by everyone. And if you don't go that extra mile to understand that context, I mean, this is across all different regions of the world, whether you're working with someone from Latin America or Scandinavia, or even, the Asia Rim, Pacific Rim. These things are the context of things really drive how you act and interact with people. And obviously the things you put here are great because they allow you to take context and then put actionable items or actionable action behind them, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Because we then become more aware of our surroundings once we understand the context a little bit better, where they're coming from.
Brilliant.
I add a bit in terms of, I was picking up a comment that was made earlier on, and that is just because you meet someone with a particular way of approaching things, don't assume that everybody else from that environment is going to be the same, because each individual is individual, and you'll find introverts in Japan as much as you'll find extroverts in Japan. So it is about approaching the individual and understanding the context that they're in, but they are an individual.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I suppose also it's being self-aware, also going back to what Gabby said about what you need from them, or just being quite clear, perhaps how you would expect things to happen. And perhaps they have a different way of doing things that you might also find really useful, and you might adapt your way of working as well. That's brilliant. Thank you so much for everyone engaging. We're going to share our last couple of slides with you, but also I would just like to point out if anyone would like to put their into the chat. I think we've got a great range of people here, and that's also one way you can help build trust overseas, by having different cultural perspectives as well. So if you'd like to do that, feel free to do so. So how can we help you build trust overseas? So this is going into some of the ways that Eva and I can help. So we formed this collaboration. I'm a graphic designer, Eva is a translator and also has translators working in a number of countries. And we just really wanted to create a platform where people can understand different cultures, but also get the linguistics and branding requirements right when exporting services or products to other countries. So for anyone who's interested, we've actually put together some tips working across cultures and a recommended reading list. So please feel free to email us if you're interested in some more information in the chat as well.
So this brings us to the end of the session. But if you have any more questions or anything you would like to share, please do so. Remember to save the chat as well. You can do so pressing the 3 dots on the bottom, or just copy and pasting.
Does anybody have any questions? Oh my goodness, I'm almost in total darkness now in my room, I've realised.
So thank you so much, everyone, for being so engaging and sharing your points of view. That was really interesting, and I've learned a lot from that as well. Yes, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to get in touch with Eva and I, or if you want to be connected to anyone. Thank you for everyone who put their LinkedIn details in the chat, because having different perspectives builds a better brand as well, and it helps us be more culturally aware. So thank you very much, everyone.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you.